In his classic book, A Canticle for Leibowitz, Walter Miller does what all good science fiction should do: commentary on society. In this case, it is a commentary on both religion and the Cold War. The novel begins in what was then a unique setting, but now has become a little bit gross: a post-nuclear, post-apocalyptic world. In this world, Russia and America have fired their nuclear weapons and destroyed civilization as we know it. Well, almost. A few fragments of human knowledge remain in what is an ancient fallout shelter. They include the design for an electrical circuit, a betting ticket from a horse race, a horse track, and a grocery list that includes things like a pound of pastrami and a can of sauerkraut. All of which seem to be written by the same person, Leibowitz. Well, after discovering these documents in this fallout shelter in the desert, a community of monks begins to preserve them. Indeed, these documents and St. Leibowitz himself become central to a new religion that emerges in this post-apocalyptic age. The new religion, called the Order of St. Leibowitz, is complete with rituals, its orders of monks, its own pope, and other similarities to a pre-Vatican II Catholicism. The novel is really broken up into three sections, three stories, in which the characters are all monks of this particular order told at different points throughout history. The order is charged with the same mission throughout, though: preservation of the documents of St. Leibowitz. Now, these monks have a very clear relationship to the surrounding world. Their mission is to preserve the past, even when the past is not fully known or fully understood. And as these three vignettes proceed, the world around them changes and progresses in very dramatic ways. The first story is very much like the period of the early church. The second, more like a medieval time period. And eventually, the final one takes place in an age where technology is more advanced even than it was in Leibowitz's time. But to the monks of this particular monastery, politics is irrelevant, time is irrelevant. Their purpose remains the same: preserve the past at all costs. Now, obviously, Miller is commenting on the nature of the Cold War and mentality and how we cannot escape its destructive grasp even after the worst has happened. But it's his comments about religion that I think are more interesting for us this morning. In many ways, he's not very far off the truth of the early church. When the Roman Empire fell, it was as if the world had come to an end. Indeed, in the writings of many Christians, the end of the Roman Empire was their equivalent to the end of the world, the apocalypse. And by the time that end finally did come for Rome, things were going pretty well for the Christians. Despite being persecuted early on, and despite that rather scathing rebuke of Rome that made its way into the Bible in the form of the book of Revelations, the Christians had come to rise to a pretty well-respected place in the Empire of Rome. There was little, if any, difference between the reach of the Roman Empire and the reach of the church, so that when one collapsed, there was fear that the other might as well. Most of all, though, they kept these things preserved when it did collapse. There was the desire to keep the knowledge and the documents, but most of all the culture of that Roman Empire alive in their remote walls of their monasteries. The church became a kind of enclave, a sanctuary, if we will, almost a vault in which the church of the past was preserved. Now, such a dramatic shift begs the question that I wish to explore this morning, and that is, what is the church's relationship to the culture and the society in which it resides? Now, I don't mean to limit by saying the church simply to Christianity, for this dynamic of the religion to its broader culture transcends one religion. It really includes all of us as well. Well, there's a number of possible answers, of course, to this question. But to make things simple, let's just consider two. First, the first possibility we might call accommodation. The church in this case supports the values, the ideals that exist in the broader culture in which it resides. Indeed, the church before the fall of Rome would be that, and in fact during the medieval period where the church was more powerful than nations could be examples. But my favorite example of this accommodationist position, if we can call it that, is far closer to home. Indeed, you can find it every Sunday on your TV dial. It's called the prosperity gospel. Now, the most pervasive cultural values in America today are consumerism and individualism. These go hand in hand, of course. One cannot have consumerism without some appeal to the individual. And this is such a pervasive value that advertisers would have you believe that it's possible to buy your way to happiness. Just pick up their product or hire their people or use their car insurance and life improves immensely. Now, rarely does anyone this side of Ayn Rand ever come out and say it quite that explicitly, but that's basically the message that's being conveyed. Now, does the church support or rebuke such a teaching? Well, this prosperity gospel I'm talking about seems to embrace consumerism and individualism and kind of repackage it into Christianity, or at least into religious branding. And this has been around a while. There's nothing new under the sun, of course. First it was Norman Vincent Peale and the Power of Positive Thinking, Robert Schuller and the Be Happy attitudes. But the prosperity gospel really finds its greatest champion in the well-coiffed visage of Joel Osteen. Now, if you've never heard him before, Joel Osteen is kind of a feel-good preacher who is really much closer to being a motivational speaker than he is to being a Baptist minister. More Tony Robbins than Billy Graham, if you will. Basically, Osteen's message is that if you come to church and believe in God, then good things will happen to you. A Protestant to proclaim the spirit of capitalism to be alive in all America. But he's just the most popular right now, and also arguably the least Christian among them. Ironically, Osteen's biggest critics come from the right, not from the left. There are whole websites, and if you've got the free time, check them out, devoted to slamming him on a pretty regular basis. Just to give you a sense of what the argument against him here is that Joel Osteen once delivered a sermon on Easter morning in which he did not talk about Jesus. Note that I said earlier that the prosperity gospel happens, you're blessed with material rewards for believing in God. Jesus, not so much. Osteen doesn't really use the Bible. He likes to tell stories, usually stories about himself or from his own life. He isn't a fire and brimstone kind of guy. He's far too likable for that. And he obviously hasn't read or really hasn't taken heed much of Job, the possibility that bad things might happen to otherwise good people. Instead, his gospel is the gospel of the consumer who transacts a purchase order with God. I believe in you, you in turn bless me. It's very easy to understand, actually, and it's extraordinarily popular, given that he sells out rock stadiums and has big TV deals. Now, being good Unitarian Universalists, we take kind of a live and let live sort of attitude towards ideas like this. Osteen, after all, isn't harming anyone. He sure isn't telling anybody that folks like gay people are evil and other nasty things that sometimes come from the religious right. That isn't his vibe. That's too negative for him. But then again, you can't talk about Jesus even on Easter. I mean, even I do that. A lot of self-contradictions to a Christianity that neglects Jesus. Even Unitarian Christianity included Jesus. They held him up as a prophet and a teacher and not as a supernatural savior, but at least they talked about him. Now, the great Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann proclaims that this idea of accommodation, that the church accommodates the values and ideals of the culture, is not what the church should be about. Brueggemann loves the prophets of the Old Testament, and it's where he lives. I recommend his books to you because He has the talent of making the world, the Old Testament and the prophets in particular, as vivid and as real as our own. In our reading this morning, Brueggemann turns to David and the conquering of the promised land as it's described in Joshua. Now, unlike what current Israeli politicians would have you believe, there were people in the land before the Hebrews arrived. They were called the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, well, they weren't particularly interested in giving up their homes to the Hebrews who just had come out of Egypt. There's contradictory accounts in the Bible as to whether Israel rolled in, guns blazing, you might say, and conquered the land all at once, or if it was more of a gradual progress of intermingling and marrying and just sort of settling in among the Canaanites, probably a little bit of both. But either way, David takes over the Canaanite city of Jebus and renames it Jerusalem. Now, I probably don't need to tell you about how important the city of Jerusalem would be to the Jewish religion. It's at least as important as Rome was to those Christians at the time of the empire's fall. But Brueggemann points to something really that no one that I know of has ever noted before, that David had to shift the perception of Jerusalem when he took over. No longer was it in the hands of the Canaanites, who had a different set of gods and goddesses to contend with. No, this was now the Axis Mundi, the new Sinai, where a temple would be built, and the Israelites would perform all of the rituals and all of the laws that had been given to them during their time in the desert. And so the entire culture, the whole society related to this city in a brand new way. It was the embodiment of the covenant between God and Israel. And thus, Brueggemann claims, the church is called to be different. The covenant with God stands amidst that of the heathen. In fact, Brueggemann goes so far as to say that the church has a mandate to be different. Accommodation to the pervasive culture runs contrary to the very idea of why a church should be formed. Now, there's lots of ways that you could be different from the people around you. Just ask any teenager or their parents about the need to be different than the people around you. And there's lots of ways churches do this. After all, the Order of St. Leibowitz was different than its culture. It understood itself to be conservative in the most literal sense, to conserve the past. Somehow, I don't think that's what's needed today to heed Walter Brueggemann's mandate to difference. I think that the liberal church of today needs to stand up to a culture of consumerism that tells us that if we buy enough stuff, then it's all going to be all right. Now, I don't mean to suggest that all of you go out, sell all your worldly possessions, and go off the grid. But if you do remember First Unitarian Church is having a book drive next month. No, I'm not going full on Marxist on you here. I simply mean to raise up, provide a red flag of warning, perhaps. To not turn to our material possessions, our material goods, to fulfill our spiritual needs. A liberal church is called to have citizens, not consumers. Citizens of a church or any other democratic institution contribute something to that group, as well as demand things of it. It's a two-way relationship, a covenant, rather than a one-way relationship of a consumer. One of the most eloquent speakers that I know of on this topic is actually a local colleague, the Reverend Julianne Silverman Bunn, who serves as Minister of Religious Education in Mainline Unitarian Church in Devon, Pennsylvania. In an essay entitled The Satisfaction Business, she writes about why we come to church. You do not come here to be told you excel at some profession or to make some good business deals. You come here to explore what keeps you going day to day, to understand what difference you can make in the lives of others. Church is not about gains and losses. Church is about the intrinsic joy on a child's face. It's about the gift of being allowed into the lives of other fragile human beings. We come to church not to be deluded into thinking that we're something we're not. We come to church to shape ourselves and our community into a vision of universal love, hope, and generosity. Those things don't come with a money-back guarantee or even a receipt. They come with hard work and the exposure of our real and often wounded souls. This is Brueggemann's mandate to difference. Come to life in the life of our church. On the one hand, the church is about meeting people where they are with what they need. And in that sense, we strive to do customer service as well as the next business. But church demands more of us, simply than being a Osteen-esque consumers of it. We are called to grow, to be better, to be healed, to be transformed, to mature, to relate to people in a new, better, more loving way than we did before we came here. Suzuki Roshi summed this up well when he would tell his students that you are perfect just as you are, and you've got a lot of work to do. That message be loud and clear to all of us as individuals, and also to the world at large. Martin Luther King taught that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. And justice is prophetic. Justice demands that the world be different than how it is right now, and the church becomes the voice for how to be different. That is our mandate. Reverend Superman Bowen continues, too often we believe we're here at church to do things that make ourselves and make others feel good. I believe we come to church to become better people. There is a big, if not huge, difference between feeling good and becoming good. The pioneers of change in our world did not always feel good, but they were compelled to do right. Being a healthy congregation means we empower one another to take risks, to do things that are outside our comfort zones, to struggle long and hard with something completely unfamiliar. E.B. White famously once quipped in an interview that he felt compelled to both save and savor the world, and that this tension made it hard to plan the day. To appreciate the things around it just as they are, and at the same time to strive to bring more justice around him. We can only do the latter if we understand that a beloved community is transformative. Not just to those of us within it, but those of us beyond its walls as well. In this month in which we reflect on justice, let us embolden ourselves to once again become that beloved community. Not just for our own sakes, but for the sakes of our souls and our children's souls. With some courage, some faith, and a vision for love mixed with power, we can become that church we dream of. I've seen flashes of it over the years. May that dream become reality. May we never lose that mandate to difference. And may we be both satisfying and transformative to all who join us on the journey. Amen. Blessed be. I invite